Hello, this is Kamil Petryk speaking. I hope you have watched Module 1, Oral Exam Facilitation. And after that, now this is the time to discuss Oral Exam Assessment. Oral exam consists of two parts, as you remember. There's the board game and short talk. In each part, the maximum of 10 marks can be awarded. So each test taker can get a maximum of 10 marks for the board game and a maximum of 10 marks for the short talk. Altogether, each test taker can be awarded a maximum of 20 marks. And how are they awarded the marks? Well, the marks are awarded in some criteria, and the criteria are exactly the same for both board game and short talk. And what are the criteria? Just two criteria. The first is vocabulary and grammar. That's one criterion. Together, vocabulary and grammar, up to 5 marks in this criterion. And another criterion, pronunciation. Also a maximum of 5 marks in this criterion. So altogether, after the oral exam, each test taker gets 4 marks. You complete the oral mark sheet with 4 marks. So there is board game marks, and this is the criterion vocabulary and grammar, and then the criterion pronunciation, and also short talk, and the same criteria, vocabulary and grammar and pronunciation. So 4 marks for each test taker, 4 marks that you put into the oral mark sheet after the oral test, and 4 marks for each test taker. If you have 5 test takers in a group, that means that you have to award 20 marks altogether, right? So 4 marks each test taker. And the question is now, how we award marks, right? Well, how do I know that I give 2 or that I give 3 or 5? Well, to answer that question, how do I know, you need some documents. There are 2 essential documents for proper marking procedure. And I want to discuss these documents right now. The first document is called Criteria for Assessment. What kind of document it is and where can we find it? Well, you have to go to the oral test guide available from the Pearson website, and there at the end you will find this document. It looks like that, Criteria for Assessment of Test Performance. That's a document that looks like a table. And in this document, each mark is explained. It is explained what Mark 5, Mark 4, Mark 3 means in every criterion, because your task actually, as an assessor in the oral examination, is to match test takers to particular marks, to particular descriptors for the marks. So let's look at the descriptors and look at this document in a little bit more detail. So what do we have there in this criteria for assessment document? We have the set of descriptors for marks in grammar and vocabulary usage. And there we can read that, for example, Mark 5 means that the test taker has an excellent range of vocabulary and grammar. Vocabulary and grammar that is used accurately, appropriately, very rare errors, but this is excellent range of vocabulary and grammar. Mark 4, we read, or it reads that this is good lexical and grammatical range. And again, there are occasional errors. Grammar might be a little weak, but there are no problems understanding that, so errors do not impede understanding. Mark 3 means that, well, errors are evident, but there is enough knowledge in grammar and vocabulary to make the communication possible with very little need for clarification. Then Mark II means that, well, there is some good usage, but the grammar and vocabulary is frequently incorrect, and there are a lot of problems for the listeners, and there are a lot of misunderstandings. Mark I, well, it means that there are some individual items that have been used, but this is so limited grammar and vocabulary that communication is practically impossible or very rarely possible. And Mark 0, well, means no useful grammar, no useful knowledge of grammar or vocabulary. So this is what we learn from this document, Criteria for Assessment. This document provides us with descriptors for marks, and our task is matching the test taker with the descriptors, which descriptor the particular test taker matches. The same story for pronunciation, another criterion. We also are provided with marks. And here what we have is very similar system. So 5 marks mean that this is excellent pronunciation, some intonation patterns, word stress, individual sounds. So this is excellent. 4 marks mean that the pronunciation is good pronunciation, readily understood. There are some lapses in pronouncing individual words. There might be some problems with stress and intonation, but all in all, the pronunciation can be named good. 3 marks, well, there are some mispronunciation, but generally we do not have any great problems understanding, right? So the communication goes relatively smoothly, despite mispronunciation. Sometimes repetition is needed, but generally there are no great problems understanding. 2 marks. Well, 2 marks, just as in grammar and vocabulary, mean frequent errors. Pronunciation makes it difficult to understand in many moments. There are a lot of misunderstandings, and this is very often necessary for listeners to ask for repetition. Mark 1, well, this is English being spoken, basically, but this is so difficult to follow that communication practically all the time breaks down. And Mark 0, well, not recognized as English, so this is not English discourse that is being produced here. And again, we have a set of descriptors, and our task is to match the test taker's pronunciation with one of the descriptors. But here the problem might be that, well, we have the descriptors. This is excellent grammar, for example. This is good grammar and vocabulary. This is enough grammar and vocabulary for communication. But another question might arise: what does it mean, actually, that this is excellent grammar, right? What is, for example, excellent grammar? So we can't answer that question without considering another document that is absolutely necessary for the assessor, because the document that gives us the standards from the language level that we actually expect in particular levels of this exam. Because we have to, all the time while giving marks, we always have to bear in mind the level, the exam level being tested. That's why we need another document that is called language content. Language content, this is the document that is an appendix to particular level guides. The level guides, they can be downloaded. They can be downloaded from the website. There is a separate level guide for each level of young learners examination. And, well, Analogically, language content is a separate document for each level. So there is a separate language content document for every level of this examination. And in this language content document, you will find 4 pieces of information about the language that we expect at this level. So for example, if you look at first words language content, we'll find the first part of language content. This is areas of language use. That for first words, this will be introducing, greeting people, identifying people by name, asking someone their name, and so on and so forth. So areas of language use. Another part of this document is the list of main structures, where the list of main structures that are expected and that are that students or test takers are exposed to in the examination at this particular level. So for example, for first words, that will be has, have got, there is, there are, imperative, and so on, so forth. Another part of this document language content is vocabulary. Some areas of vocabulary, as you can see, for example, for first words, that will be simple colors, nouns for family members, numbers from 1 to 20, and so on, so forth. And the last part of this document language content is the topics that will that are discussed, that will appear, that we expect the test takers to be able to, for example, talk about if we are talking about the oral test. So that's another document that you need, apart from the descriptors, apart from this guidelines for the assessment, criteria for assessment, sorry, the marking criteria and the descriptors of the marks. Apart from that, we also need this language content, because we have to bear in mind what level is being tested. Your final mark is some kind of a total of 2 documents, of the information from 2 documents. So criteria for assessment of test performance, the documents that gives you the descriptors, what each mark means, and this document you use to match the test takers with it, with the descriptors in this document. But you also need some information from another document, that is language content, that is prepared separately for each level. But apart from that, I'd like to give you some additional guidelines for assessment, some additional information to help you when you give particular marks. So I'd like to look through particular marks, through particular criteria, and share with you some remarks. So grammar and vocabulary. When you want to give 5, remember that 5 means that the range of grammar and vocabulary is really good. You remember that meant that read excellent even. And this grammar and vocabulary is used accurately, right? This is what 5 means. This is when we give 5. Pronunciation 5 means that there are no problems at all for listeners, and the stress and intonation patterns are very natural. This is when we give 5 for pronunciation. 4 for grammar and vocabulary. You shouldn't expect the answers to be too long, especially in the board game, for example, where naturally the answer can be 1 sentence, right? Typically no longer than 2 sentences. So, well, do not be afraid to give 4. A 4 should be given to the answers that are correct, use proper verb form, but may sometimes be short, especially in the board game. You do not expect long speeches or long turns in the board game, because this is the structure of this part, where there is question and answer. And this answer doesn't have to be very long, and still can be worth a 4. But if the answer is only yes and no, even if it, well, in some cases it might be natural, right, or correct to say yes, no, but only yes and no cannot be worth 4, even if they are correct. Pronunciation 4, well, here we need some evidence of natural stress and intonation use. This is when we give for pronunciation when you can hear that there is some signs of natural stress and intonation. 3 for grammar and vocabulary. When to give 3 for grammar and vocabulary? First of all, this is, bear in mind that communication is the most important element that you have to bear in mind. So when the candidate can be understood, even if grammar and vocabulary are not perfect, are not good, this will be worth 3. Remember, 3 means adequate grammar and vocabulary. So if you can understand the test taker, if the communication flows, even if there are problems like not ideal grammar and vocabulary, that can be worth 3. But if the test taker's answers do not make sense, they cannot get 3, right? They have to make sense, because communication is the most important here. And if answers do not make sense, there is no communication, even if the language used is quite good. Also, remember that in the short talks, there are kind of 2 parts, right? There is this this talk that the test taker gives, but there are also questions that they might ask later on. So if they speak badly in the short talk, but they compensate for this in asking questions later on, then still they can get a 3. Pronunciation, that is worth a 3. Well, here, 3, a pronunciation that is worth a 3. This is flat delivery, but delivery that is comprehensible. And again, communication, right? If you can understand the test taker, if the communication flows, even with there are some mispronunciations, right? Sometimes you ask for repetition because of some mispronunciation. This is still 3. You always kind of weigh if this test taker can be understood or more than not. Communication. If you can understand the test taker, that means pronunciation worth a 3. Now, a mark of 2. A few remarks about that. For both criteria, grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation. Remember, before you give a mark of 2, look for positive achievement rather than errors. There is this tendency that we focus on errors when we listen to test takers. They are more easily noticed. But here, yeah, we are trying to look for positive achievement and to see to what extent communication is possible. 2 means that there are frequent errors, both in pronunciation and grammar and vocabulary. So make sure if the errors are really frequent. Always compare to see if there are more frequently good examples than bad. And also be careful. Candidates who speak a lot, often make more mistakes. And as I said, we easily notice mistakes. So we can easily penalize a test taker who speaks more and, well, naturally can make more mistakes. And you listen for good usage and ability to communicate before deciding on 2. So if communication is possible, if communication runs relatively smoothly, that won't probably be 2. But at the same time, if you can hear test taker and there are a lot of hesitations, need for prompting from the examiner, there are very short answers, that might take the score down to 2 for grammar and vocabulary. And the mark of 1, a few remarks here. Remember, one is given only for very, very poor performance. Yeah, you remember, communication only rarely possible. When this performance is limited to isolated words most of the time, and when it's really hard to understand what the test takers are saying, only then is one given. Very, very poor communication and very, very little communication. To help you to give marks, right, and assess the examinations, we have prepared some sample recordings of oral examinations. So what I suggest you do after watching this module is watch the samples available online, samples of exams. We have prepared samples at every level. And watch the samples and think what marks, or you can even take notes, right, and complete some oral mark sheets, like 4 marks for every test taker. So watch the samples online and think what marks you would give to every test taker in the sample. And these videos, these video samples, are accompanied by a document called Commentary on Sample Oral Recordings. And this document contains detailed description of every test taker presented in the sample. So every test taker has been marked and every test taker has been commented on. So after giving your own marks, you can go to the document, you can read a very detailed description of each test taker's performance, and you can check each test taker's marks. And this way you can compare this to your own marks and see how Pearson team they give marks, and you can use this as some kind of guidance or some kind of standard for your own marking. Thank you very much for this, for watching this module, and please remember to go to the video samples available online, and please remember to try your own marking. Thank you very much.